A few months ago, I was surfing in California. And when you're surfing, it's hard to convince yourself to get out of the water just to reapply your sunscreen. It was a huge mistake. What happened is that I burnt my face really bad. And my co-founder, Rachel, had a similar story. We were at the beach having so much fun, playing frisbee and volleyball, that we forgot to put on our sunscreen, even though we were aware of the dangers of UV. Next week, it looked like this. And this is a huge problem, since 90% of skin cancer is caused by overexposure to UV, and that 1 in 5 people in North America will get skin cancer of some form in their lifetimes. And in Australia and other sunny countries, this number jumps to 1 in 3, resulting in skin cancer being the form of cancer with the highest growth rate right now. But that's okay, because we have ways to protect ourselves, right? We have physical sunscreens, which work by having titanium dioxide and zinc oxide that reflect UV rays off of the skin. And we have chemical sunscreens, which use stuff like oxybenzone to absorb some of the intensity of the incoming UV rays and reduce their energies and reduce their wavelength so that increase their wavelength so that they're less dangerous to your skin. But the problem is that sunscreen wears off. So when do you reapply your sunscreen? How do you know that it's still doing its job? And that's where we come in. What we've created is a color-changing marker that tells you exactly when to reapply your sunscreen. You can draw this on a small spot on your arm before you apply your sunscreen. And when your sunscreen's protecting you, our ink is clear. So when you don't see anything on your arm, you know that you're safe. However, when your sunscreen is no longer protecting you and our ink is exposed to UV light, it changes to a bright purple color. And now you have the knowledge you need to apply sunscreen exactly when you need to.
But let's talk a little bit about how we're doing this. So light interacts with matter in many different ways, through reflection, scattering, absorption, and transmission. The main property that we are considering, that we consider for our development, is actually the absorption of light in materials. So if you consider pigments and dyes, they essentially absorb all visible wavelengths of light except for a certain range. The range they don't absorb, they scatter back, and this is what you see with your eyes. So if you consider this apple here, obviously you can see it's red, and that's because that is the red wavelengths are the only wavelengths that it reflects back to you. And so if you consider another example we have, is this molecule here. Simply is a red dye at a lower pH, and that is, it has certain charges and certain hydrogens on different groups. And what we see here is that as we increase the pH of this molecule, you actually notice a clear color, you will actually see a color change in the solution. It goes from red to purple to blue. And this is essentially talking about how an electronic change and how a molecular change kind of leads to the change in colors of these particular types of dyes. And so what we are doing is similar to this, except that our system, we actually have UV light act as the catalyst to have a structural change in the molecule. So if you consider this very basic diagram of, say, 3 green triangles on the left-hand side, you can see that as we expose it to UV light, what happens with the molecule is it has a structural conformational change, so intermolecularly rearranges. This causes a difference in the energy vibrational states of the molecule, and it actually changes color. And of course, for our design, we would want that color to be reversible in the presence of regular light when there's no more UV. And so we can talk a little bit about UV as well. UVA and UVB, kind of the main ones you see from the sun in the environment outside. Obviously UVA is the major portion of that. It's 95%. It'll penetrate the clouds. It's what you'll always be exposed to. Whereas you have UVB, which is actually more dangerous. It's not as much and is blocked by the clouds. But on those very, very sunny days, obviously you are exposed to that. What we've been able to show is that in the presence of both of these, we've induced a color change in our ink solution. And so you can see there's 4 examples here of different color changes we've been able to achieve just by exposing to UV light and then reversing that by exposing it to regular light, which is again what we see here. Here we've actually drawn this on a surface. We've taken it outside on the far left here where it's blue, It's a blue color change, it happens immediately in sunlight, and when we bring it back inside, where there's no more UV light, and we're just in the presence of regular visible light, it changes back to white, again demonstrating that reversibility. And to talk a little bit more into how that's happening, here we have two UV absorbance curves. They are actually the exact same sample. The difference between them is the purple curve has been exposed to UV light for about 30 seconds, and then its absorbance, again, measured. So what we kind of use to describe here is that if you consider the black curve here, which is not exposed to UV light, has a large absorption in the UV range, from like 240 to 340. And so what happens is upon exposure to UV light, this absorbance interacts with the molecule, allows it to conformally change, and if it's allowed to be exposed for even only up to 30 seconds, it will shift to what the purple curves looks like, where you actually see a change in the absorbance and now have visible light absorbance. And so why this is important to us is if you consider that this molecule now, assuming, say, we block it with sunscreen or it's only exposed to visible light, it no longer will see any of the absorbance here, and in its exposed state would be absorbing in the visible light range. And so how it uses this to our advantage is that this light is what interacts with the molecule, allowing it to relax back to its first initial state, changing it back to clear in the presence of only regular light. And now some people have asked us, why don't we use fluorescence materials? They interact with UV light, they emit in visible light ranges. There are many problems with this. I mean, obviously, fluorescence absorbs the light, excites the molecule, relaxes, emits at a different wavelength. This has nothing to do really with any kind of structural change, it was more a property of these particular molecules. My colleague Derek here will explain why it is we don't use that approach.
So, fluorescent materials have a large absorbance in the visible light range. So even when you're not exposed to UV light, you can see the color change in the fluorescent material. And even the most fluorescent materials like fluorescein still observe this effect. The only absorbance they have in the UV range is in the UVB, which is you only ever get exposed to UVB on very bright days with no clouds in the sky. So for our design, because you can still get sunburned pretty badly even on a cloudy day, it doesn't make sense for us to use a fluorescent material. And then compounded on that, in order to get the sort of magnitude of color change that we see with our molecule, you need to have a high dose, which is going to cause toxic effects, and that is a product that we can never deliver to consumers. On the other hand, our ink is thermally stable. It can go in any range all the way up until 130 degrees Celsius. And this is important for us, is that no matter how hot it is outside, only UV light makes our ink change color, nothing else. Our ink is inert, and it's non-reactive, and it's photostable. So even though we blend it into a film-forming ink, the UV doesn't cure onto your skin. This is important so you can get it off. And finally, for manufacturing purposes, we only need a really low weight percent of our ink in the solution. All the inks that you've seen in our slides so far are less than 5% by weight. So, especially when designing with nanotechnology for consumers, safety is a huge concern. We needed to make sure that our ink was non-toxic, safe for kids, because this is our target market, and it's safe for sensitive skin. So we started by going to the mall, looking at cosmetics, looking at what was already approved and used and wanted by our market, and then analyzing the materials and how we can integrate those into our market. And then we're backing this up with extensive regulatory testing. So what we've already begun on campus are cell studies that have proven that we have no initial toxic effects compared to our controls. We're not mutating DNA or causing cancer. So that's good, but that's not enough. We're going to start by doing skin and eye irritation, showing that if it gets into your eye, it's not going to cause a rash. And also dermal toxicity, where we're not, by applying this product in your skin, we're not going to kill rats or mice. And the most important tests are for last, being skin sensitization, meaning that our ink doesn't make you any more susceptible to other products that are already on the market. So even though sunscreen contains a lot of solvents, that our ink doesn't make you more susceptible to the solvents in sunscreen. And finally, a phototoxicity assay, which will show that in both the clear structure and the purple structure of our ink, you're not going to be exposed to a toxic material. So as I just mentioned, sunscreen is actually a solvent. It'll wipe off almost anything. And we cannot have our product be removed by an application of sunscreen. So to design around this, we looked into polymer thin films. So the properties of a polymer are directly dependent on the monomers you use and the reactivity ratios, their feed ratios. And as you can see in the diagram, from using a copolymerization, you can get, with the same monomer as one, you can get two very different materials. The top one has a high glass transition temperature, meaning that it's more brittle, but it's a more chemically resistant film. Whereas the polymer with the lower glass transition temperature is more adhesive, it's more rubbery, but it's more likely to be wiped off by a solvent, such as sunscreen. So to design around this, we've created a copolymer film with a glass transition of about 50 degrees Celsius. So this means that we have the strength and chemical resistance of a high glass transition temperature polymer with the adhesive properties of one that is lower. And here's what it looks like. So on the right, although it's harder to see because sunscreen is also white and the tray is white, we've applied sunscreen over top of our ink. And on the left is just the polymer, our film forming ink drawn on a tray. And we exposed both of these trays to about 10 seconds of UV light. And you can see that instantly, the one on the left tells you exactly when you're exposed to UV light, and then the one on the right shows that not only did the ink not smear, but that sunscreen is protecting the ink, and our ink remains in its clear or whitish state. And how has this affected us? So if you remember the UV spectrum from before, we had very defined peaks. But once we created our film forming ink, we noticed that our peaks are much less defined. However, you can still see that there is a strong absorbance in the UV range, which causes our ink to change color to purple. And once sunscreen is blocking the ink and you're exposed to both UV and visible light, the slight peak in the visible range allows the molecule to relax and to return to its clear state. And this happens in a very short amount of time. So it'll change to its UV exposed or purple state in about 10 to 15 seconds. And once covered with sunscreen and you're outside in the middle of the summer, it'll change back in around 30 seconds, or if you're in the shade in the middle of winter, in about a minute. So for our customers, making a film forming ink doesn't affect their knowledge of when they need to reapply sunscreen, and it allows them to have one application that lasts all day. And speaking of that, in order to make our thing last all day, we made sure that it's waterproof and sunscreen proof, and it won't smear. Because people want to draw our product and have fun, and they don't want their designs that they make to look terrible after they get out of the water. So we thought about using markers or maybe henna inks, which work by having small pigments that penetrate your skin and dye it. But the problem is that if you quickly apply sunscreen over top of Sharpie marker, it actually gets completely wiped off and solvated. You won't even notice it's there. But if you leave it in too long, your skin gets dyed, and then it's there for days and you can't get it off. This won't work for us. So we looked into temporary tattoos, which are a pre-formed polymer film, and they won't smear when a sunscreen is applied on them. But you can't have your own custom shapes. You can't have fun, and it's harder to draw it over, it's harder to draw in areas that you're most looking to have knowledge about your UV exposure. So what we've created is a writable temporary tattoo that allows our ink allows you to have fun, and that's the most important. Because we want you to have an awesome day outside with your family and friends and come home sunburn free. I'm Derek, this is Chad, and we've got Rachel in the room as well. We're all from Suncayr, and we're making sun safety simplified. So we'd like to open it up for questions and see what you guys think.
Yes.
Yeah, so the only sunscreens that actually have a weird interaction with our product are spray sunscreens. So spray sunscreens have nasty propellants in them, which tend to dissolve almost any polymer film. So when we're going to market, we highly recommend that we use cream sunscreens. And organic sunscreens, they all will work with our product. It's just that if you have a spray sunscreen, you can only get about 1 or 2 reapplications before our ink will start to smear. And it's something that we tried to design around, but in the end, we couldn't do anything about it.
Question is about how you apply it, right? Currently, you want a thin film on the skin, and you put it as an ink or marker. So, do you have any way to prevent polymerization in the ink, and it only forms a film when you apply on the skin?
Yeah. Well, I mean, so it's in the marker, it's in solution. The idea is that when you write any marker on, it dries, and so it's already actually a polymer inside the solution. It's just staying there. When you draw it on, you're just having that solvent dry off, which is like the ethanol kind of water mixture, and then that thin film will actually adhere during that process. So it's already polymerized before you're not actually polymerizing it on the skin.
Just the evaporation of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So, I understand your molecule is top secret. One fundamental question is with the transparent to purple transition, is that due to morphology change of the molecule, reorganization in the structure? Like what it is in principle that they change out?
Yeah, so the intermolecular bonding of our molecule changes, and that changes I guess Chad can explain it a bit better, but
Sure. I mean, go ahead if you got it. The molecule actually has like this, like I said, a conformal kind of intramolecular change. It's not reacting with anything. It's just that the presence of UV lights allows the breakage of some bonds within the molecule that reform in a different way in the same molecule, allowing it to change its shape. And so this change in shape and obviously these change in bonds kind of lead to the difference in the vibrational energies and these absorption states of the molecule, as we kind of showed with the UV results, leading to the difference in the color that's actually reflected back that you'll see.
I assume the UV must have given the energy to make the molecule go to a little bit higher energy states, which relax back.
Yeah.
So I guess it's like an interesting follow-up that you might be trying to get at, is that what happens if our ink is exposed to UV and you leave it in darkness? It actually stays. It's stable in its purple state. It's not like it's not like a fluorescence effect where over time it'll decay back down. It'll actually stay in its purple state. What it needs is the presence of visible light that's not UV light to change back. And the only way you can get that is if you're inside and not exposed to UV, or you're outside and you have sunscreen on. So we basically make it more or less impossible for somebody to not know if they're not exposed to UV.
What's the visible irradiance of UV which is needed for the color change? Like what is the visible intensity of UV?
We haven't really quantified that. I mean, we have 8-watt UV lamps, but we have demos that we've taken outside in November in the shade that show it changing. So we can tune the amount of UV that it takes for a molecule to change color, but we didn't feel a need to quantify the irradiance to see it change color as long as it happens within about 30 seconds. So yeah, on a cloudy day, even right now we can come to our booth and we can take it outside and show you that it will change color.
Are you able to change the amount of time it takes the property to change color and reverse back or not?
Yeah, we can change that. So we've went through a few different structures of our molecule before settling on the one that we have. Some are more sensitive to UVB, but this is the one that's sensitive to UVA the most. And that's the most important, since that's what 95% of the sun's rays are. And that's how you can still be sunburnt on a cloudy day, skiing. So that's how we settled on the structure that we have.
Yeah, so our dyes basically tells you exactly when you're exposed to any UV. So it's not like a dosage dependent. As soon as you hit a critical dose, it changes color. So we can tune that critical dose, but for now we're just kind of making it as low as possible so that you know as soon as you're exposed to any UV.
Yes.
How do you take it off the skin afterwards?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we can use makeup remover or rubbing alcohol to get it off. I mean, it's got about the same tackiness as a temporary tattoo as we described. So if you left it on your skin and didn't take it off, it would probably flake off just by friction in about maybe 2 days. But you can take it off with soap and a hot shower and scrubbing if you want. But makeup remover is what we recommend.
Yes.
You mentioned you have several tests still to do, but what's your timeline?
Right.
Okay, so right now we've been at this a bit longer. We've been working on this idea for about a year. So we've raised money and we've ordered enough material to get this regulatory testing done, and it's being manufactured right now. So once it gets to us, we can give it to our contract research organization, and that'll take about a month. So we're hoping by about end of May, end of June, we'll have all of our toxicity data back, and then we can have a better estimate of when this can hit market. I guess like regulatory-wise in Canada, we're looking at that as soon as we can prove we're non-toxic, we can sell. And in the US, it'll be about an extra year because they require some additional regulation on new color additives. So.
How much will it cost?
So we're looking to retail for about $12. We're always open to having ideas of smaller pens and bigger pens. I mean, what our consumers have most told us is that it'd be convenient to go through a marker at about the same rate that you go through a bottle of sunscreen. So based off of how many applications of our marker you can get out of a bottle or out of a pen, we're going to match that with the size of the price point of a bottle of sunscreen so that you can kind of buy both together. So it's just more convenient.
Have you joined up with any sunscreen manufacturers that might do a combination sale?
Yeah, so we're definitely looking into partnering with sunscreen companies in the future. At the moment, we're kind of flying a little bit under the radar because we want to make sure that we actually get the tech done and don't start unnecessary competition. But we are definitely looking into partnering with sunscreen companies to package it together in the future.
Sunscreen manufacturer, they tend to advertise their sunscreens last long, right? So is it a good combination?
Right.
So there's lots of studies that show that you only apply about 25 to 50% of the recommended dose of sunscreen. And that's how a lot of people end up getting burned on a day, is that you don't know how much to actually reapply because you're not following their recommendations. So it's actually an advantage of our company because we help consumers know that they should be reapplying more often. So we're going to be driving their sales up.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
All right, thank you very much.
Yes.
Thanks, guys.